In this podcast episode, Sam Shamoun, a Christian apologist of Assyrian heritage, discusses the complex, often misunderstood, and highly sensitive world of Christian-Muslim dialogue. This episode shines a fierce light on contradictions within the Quran and the life of Prophet Muhammad as seen through Sam's meticulous research and lived experience. As he unpacks his journey from a confused youth to a formidable Christian voice in apologetics, listeners are invited to reconsider what they know about religion, faith, and truth. How does a man navigate such polarizing waters without losing himself? What fundamental differences separate Christianity and Islam, and why do they matter? The conversation is rich, raw, and unapologetically honest. Sam Shamoun's story starts in Chicago, framed by his Assyrian roots and a surprisingly fragmented introduction to Christianity during his childhood. Despite being baptized in the Syrian Church of the East, he admits that his early years were spiritually empty, sharing touching memories of a young boy named Raymond who introduced him to the gospel at just 6.5 years old. This early exposure planted seeds that would much later grow into a passionate faith. Yet his adolescence was marked by turmoil, family breakdown, emotional insecurities, and struggles with low self-esteem and body dysmorphia that drove him toward bodybuilding as a refuge. But even as he sought physical strength, a deeper emptiness persisted. He acknowledged the profound love of Jesus shown to him in his youth was missing from his life, and it took years of searching to rediscover that love. It wasn't until his young adult years, working various jobs in Chicago, that curiosity about Islam began to permeate his worldview. His encounter with a Muslim coworker and exposure to the Nation of Islam stirred questions but ultimately prompted further study rather than conversion. At the heart of Sam's examination lies the critical theological rift between Christianity and Islam, especially focused on the identity and claims of Jesus compared to Muhammad. Islam venerates Jesus as a prophet and the Messiah born of the Virgin Mary, but vehemently denies his divinity and sonship to God, which are fundamental to Christian doctrine. Sam points to the New Testament, especially John's Gospel, where Jesus explicitly names titles such as the way, the truth, and the life, divine attributes that, according to Islamic belief, belong solely to Allah. He highlights the Islamic dilemma, an intellectual trap where Muslims must reconcile Muhammad's claim that his Quran confirms previous scriptures with the fact that the Quran directly contradicts biblical accounts. Either the Bible is corrupted or Muhammad's prophethood is false. Sam stresses that from the Christian perspective, Jesus was not a Muslim prophet and never foretold Muhammad's coming, countering Quranic verses that claim the opposite. This theological divergence forms the basis of why Christianity and Islam remain distinct religions rather than branches of a single faith. A particularly controversial aspect discussed is the Quran's injunctions about fighting non-believers. Sam explores chapter 9, verses 28 to 33, which instruct Muslims to fight those who do not believe in Allah or the Last Day and refuse to submit to Islam. He clarifies that this is not limited to individuals who threaten Muslims, but extends to anyone who rejects Islamic theology, thereby legitimizing warfare and coercion under the religion's final marching orders. Sam carefully distinguishes between cultural Muslims and actual enforcement of these Quranic commands, noting that no true Islamic state today fully implements these laws. However, historically, such verses facilitated the expansion of Islam through conquest and subjugation. This teaching remains a thorny issue to many, especially when balanced against modern multicultural societies. The podcast engages in a candid discussion about women's roles and rewards according to Islamic texts. When asked what Muslim women receive in paradise if men are promised 72 virgins, Sam reveals that official Islamic responses are evasive, promising a reward beyond what a heart has desired, without ever affirming that women receive multiple husbands. He contrasts the graphic, often sexualized depictions of paradise for men, including perpetual virgin companions and pleasures described in Quranic and Hadith literature, with the comparatively vague and unclear promises to women. Additionally, he criticizes Muhammad's treatment of his wives, particularly the story of a wife who feared divorce and negotiated to remain legally married but without conjugal visits, highlighting the relegation and marginalization of women within Islamic marital practices. These realities challenge the notion of Islam as a religion that elevates women's status. Sam's Assyrian background adds another rich layer to the conversation. He reflects on the ancient Assyrian Church of the East, often mislabeled Nestorian by outsiders, a misnomer originating from accusations against a 5th century bishop named Nestorius. This heritage deeply influenced Sam's early religious outlook and sparked his curiosity about the true nature of Christ. The story frames the larger issue of how denominational traditions and historical schisms affect contemporary faith understanding. He also discusses Assyria's historical hardships, loss of homeland, persecution by surrounding empires, and survival against extraordinary odds. Sam views the survival of the Assyrian church and culture as evidence of divine providence and faithfulness, despite centuries of suffering and displacement. His reflections prompt listeners to think about the endurance of faith communities and the role of history in shaping religious identity. Sam reveals how he first became involved in Christian-Muslim apologetics, motivated by painful experiences watching Christians get defeated in debates with Muslims due to lack of preparation or understanding. Early Christian apologists often stumbled against Muslim arguments, despite Christians' supposed advantage on their own scriptures. This frustration ignited a passion in Sam to study Islamic texts deeply, watch debates, and educate himself. A turning point came when a Muslim debater publicly humiliated him, triggering a vow to become so well-equipped that no Christian would ever be embarrassed again in such confrontations. This personal journey of rigorous self-education and wrestling with difficult theological questions showcases his commitment to truth and effective dialogue. What does it take to genuinely understand the other side in debates about faith? An important nuance Sam addresses is the diversity within Islam itself, especially regarding the acceptance of Hadith, sayings, and traditions of Muhammad alongside the Quran. Sunni Muslims generally accept Hadith as authoritative, while other groups like Quran-only Muslims or Shia hold different views. This internal diversity complicates how Islamic teachings are understood and applied. Sam points out that many controversial interpretations, especially those related to violence or women's rights, stem from Hadith and not directly from the Quran, though both play roles in Islamic jurisprudence. This variability means that when confronting Islamic claims, one must clarify which tradition and texts one addresses. Looking at contemporary trends, the conversation shifts to the rapid growth of Islam worldwide, including in Western countries. Sam notes that much of Muslim population growth is due to higher birth rates rather than conversion. At the same time, he observes a revival among Christian youth worldwide, fueled partly by online content and renewed zeal for faith. He also highlights the complexity within religious populations, nominal versus devout believers, sectarian splits within Islam, and the uneven distribution of zealotry among adherents. The question arises, in a world where religions swell in numbers but diverge in conviction and practice, what does true faith look like? Sam issues a heartfelt warning against cult of personality in religious contexts. He draws from Scripture to explain how God uses broken, imperfect humans as vessels of grace, purposely enabling their weaknesses to spotlight divine power rather than human brilliance. He shares personal testimony of spiritual attacks aimed at discouragement and reflects on Apostle Paul's humility amid great spiritual gifts. This candid vulnerability underscores the necessity for humility in leadership and spirituality, emphasizing that followers should focus not on personalities, but on Christ himself. Throughout the discussion, Sam stresses the imperative to study scriptures within their historical and linguistic contexts, rather than imposing modern interpretations anachronistically. He illustrates how words and meanings evolve over time, rendering contemporary understandings insufficient or misleading when applied retroactively to ancient texts. This principle is crucial when examining both the Bible and the Quran, as misunderstandings fuel many interfaith conflicts. How often do we judge ancient sacred texts by modern standards without appreciating cultural and historical realities? Can careful context restore understanding and respect in religious discourse? Towards the end, the conversation turns personal and community-centered concerning Assyrian affairs, including tensions and misunderstandings within the diaspora. Sam expresses cautious optimism about potential unity among Assyrians and the role of spiritual maturity in bridging divides. He calls for patience and grace toward younger voices still growing in faith and knowledge. This reflection invites broader consideration of how religious minorities navigate internal conflict, tradition, and modernity while preserving identity. The podcast is a compelling journey through theology, history, personal testimony, and cultural identity. Sam Shamoun invites listeners not only to challenge Islamic claims, but to rediscover the beauty and distinctiveness of the Christian faith as centered on Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. His story encourages intellectual rigor married with spiritual humility, revealing that confronting difficult truths requires patience, grace, and dependence on God's strength. What is the cost of truth in a world so divided by belief? Are we willing to approach these conversations with courage without compromise? Ultimately, the dialogue provokes us to reflect on the character of Christ himself, infinitely beautiful and wholly other. Once we see him rightly, can we ever settle for less?